Hello everyone! So there were so many requests in the past, make something in the Dutch for black. And I just decided to show you one of the most typical attacks by black in Stonewall attack. It's not called Stonewall attack, but I'm actually going to teach you how to attack with the Stonewall when you play the Dutch opening with the black pieces. So d4. You know that the Dutch originally happens after f5, but that's not my suggestion. And if I remember correctly, even Ginger GM gives a suggestion, don't play f5 immediately, because if you play f5 immediately, you just react that they can go with knight c3, they can go with queen d3, they can go with e4 gambit, g4 gambit, they can play h3, g4, favorite line similar to Trumpovsky, bishop g5, and so many other things. That's why you actually cut all these possibilities by white if you play first e6, although there is one drawback of this order of moves. So if you play e6, you gotta be ready to play French defense, although there is like a very known thing, but that those who play d4, they will rarely go with e4, but anyways, you gotta be well prepared and you gotta be ready to play French in case they go with e4. Most of your opponents won't do that, and they will either go with c4 or they will go with knight f3 if they decide to go and fight in a typical against the Dutch defense with either c4 or knight f3. So what's the point here? When they go with knight f3, you just go with f5. And there we go. They can't play e4. They cannot play g4. h3 and g4 is way weaker with the knight and f3. Knight c3 is not good anymore. Also, bishop g5 gives nothing to white. So the whole bunch of things we've just eliminated by first move e6. And when they go with g3, you go knight f6, bishop g2. Here, I'm intending to do a special lecture teaching you how to play a traditional system with bishop e7, d6 castles, and queen e8. That's my favorite line. I really enjoy it, and I do want to teach you to play like that with black pieces. But it's going to be in one of the next lectures. In today's game, actually, I just want to show you the game between Kotov and Bondarevsky. Fantastic game. That is a true model game for Stonewall players. How should you play with black pieces and attack white's position? So take a look at this one, and you're going to really be able to learn a lot about the Dutch type of positions and attacks in the Stonewall by black. So let's go. You just go with e5. They go castles, and in Stonewall, you go with bishop d6. I just want to remind all of these guys that Richard Ruppert likes to play bishop e7 at this point, and when you go with some c4 or anything you do, he just goes with knight e4 and even goes with crazy h5. I played it twice in my practice. I won both games with the black pieces in blitz. In a tournament, let's just call it tournament, real blitz over the board. Against an FM and against an IM, but against an IM I had some problems, but I managed to win. Although main line is of course bishop d6. This is a natural place for the bishop. It controls e5, it goes after the king side and after the white's king, of course, and probably this is the most ambitious approach by black players. When you play bishop d6, they just go with c4. c4 is a classic approach. They go with this move. They just put a tangent on the center, and you play maximum flexibility with c6. If you ask me, from white's point of view, there is only one critical line and a critical approach by white here. It's when they play queen c2, and after you go with castle, they go with the knight c3. The whole point of this approach is that black should never capture on c4 because white is going to break in the center with e4. While at the same time, no matter what black plays, like knight b7, you just want to go with a rook b1, and any d takes c4, if it happens at any point by black, white should break with e4. If not, white should be going with the b4 and b5 with a typical minority attack, fighting the Carlsbad pawn structure. It's a pawn structure d5, c6, b7, and a7, and you just want to take on c6 and create a backward pawn and a weakness eventually. That's critical line. Although Kotov went with a knight bd2. How many players will play like this? A lot. Every single day you will find a lot of guys who will play like this because they just want to play a hyper solid b3, bishop b2 plan. So after castles, b3, I'd like to stop. So black made the typical Stonewall pawn structure. It's called f5, e6, d5, c6 pawn structure. Knight on f6 is at some point going to jump on e4. Bishop controls d6. And you've just made short castle. The first part of the plan has just been done. Black is fine. Now the second part of the plan should be, how can black organize and set up his pieces in order to create some kind of a kingside attack? Bondarevsky in this game played a beautiful queen e8 move, going for the king side, white's king in general, and hoping to jump with this queen on h5. After knight e1, it's a very lovely plan by white, because this is a famous way of repositioning your pieces in the Dutch defense from white's point of view. So white wants to place this knight on d3, would like to jump with this knight on f3, would like to jump with, to place his bishop on b2, and to eventually set one of his knights to control e5, where white would absolutely have a solid game. After knight bd7, that's how you fight in these positions, white jump with the knight on d3. Okay, he did everything looks cool, but black also continues in a typical Stonewall fashion. So he just jumps with the knight on e4. I very much like when in Stonewall you set your knight on e4, no one can do anything against it, and in case of any knight takes e4, you just capture an e4 and get a great game, and they just have lots of difficulties afterwards. Also, you get a tempo by attacking the knight on d3. So when they go with the knight f3, you just have to go with the queen h5. I very much like cooperation between bishop on d6, knight being placed in the center on e4, and this queen standing on h5, just preparing itself for some potential attacking ideas such as g5 and g4. In the game, Kotov went for knight f4. Logical move. He challenges black to take on f4, which would be disastrous for black, because then you would just lose the bishop pair. He would have like control of the dark squares, and this would be terrible for black. And of course, Bondarevsky brings the queen back, not all the way to e8, but goes on f7. He defends pawn on e6 and kind of hides this queen on f7 and preparing himself for some g5. Kotov continues the game in a typical queen c2 fashion, because he is just overprotecting c4 square, maybe opening some rook d1 possibilities, but in all, his plan is also to control the center by placing this queen on c2. Bondarevsky played g5. He's kicking the knight away from f4, and I like this one. For example, when I said typical Stonewall attack, this is what I meant. I meant queen on h5, bishop on d6, knight on e4, and on top of all that, very important way to attack is g5. So when they go with the knight d3, all of a sudden pressure on e5 is going to happen, especially if they manage to play some bishop b2 afterwards. Although it looks fine for white. It looks like they're going to get like a good outpost e5 and good control of the center. But from another point of view, you just have to keep in mind one more thing. We are just going to organize ourselves to attack on the king side. So Bondarevsky, at the moment, Kotov threatens to take on g5, so Bondarevsky goes back with the queen on h5. Unlike previous position, where white had knight f4, there is no this possibility any longer. Pawn on g5 prevents this, and also he at some point wants to go with g4. but not immediately. Don't be impatient. First of all, it would give them knight f4, it would give them bishop f4. I mean, at some point, it would give them absolutely nice and solid knight h4 if you play early g4. So white goes with the knight f to e5. Clever move. He just wants to kick the knight away from the center and eventually maybe even break in the center with some e4 at some point somehow. One of the crucial moments in this game happened now. I'm saying crucial moments because you have a pretty nice knight on d7 and bishop on d6 that control e5. Although when the knight came on e5, white seems to have absolutely satisfactory game. You still have queen on h5, very powerful knight on e4, but still there is something that we're actually missing here, and that's additional piece in the game, rook on f6. You know how much I like rook lifting in chess. In this case, black just wants to go with a rook h6, reminds me on some typical Grand Prix type of ideas, reminds me on some King's Indian type of attacks. And rook h6 is another thing that comes, all together with the pawn being on g5. Because if you early pushed pawn on g4, then the bishop on c1 would become very powerful, and you would never be able to play rook h6 because bishop c1 hits the h6. So after rook f6, white played the most logical f3 move. What I like about this game is that it actually teaches you how to attack, and not in like ideal way, everything about this game was so perfect by black. There is no refutation. Maybe computers would find something for white. That's not a point. You play against humans, and humans are very much afraid when you start attacking them, let alone engines. Engine will always play top moves. He doesn't have emotions. He doesn't want to react if you just play something, like smashing the clock and doing something like g5 or rook f6. But when you do it against human, he's going to he's going to shake, tremble, and all of a sudden feel some kind of, fear during the game. Here, after Bondarevsky played rook h6, I absolutely have no doubts that how Kotov felt at this moment. Rook on h6, queen on h5, they just pressured this pawn on h4, and there are two moments. What if they take knight? What if they take knight? Just queen h2, king f2, and knight f6. A very lovely knight jump, because this knight wants to go on e4 to take with tempo. Afterwards, you can even for example, strengthen your attack with a rook to h3. They don't have time to do any rook h1 because you just have knight e4, and the problem is that they can't play king e1 because you have queen g2, for example, and when they take on h6, you just deliver checkmate. The thing is, they can't play king f1 either because you just have knight g3 and they're just lost. And finally, if they go with a king to e3, why would you queen g3, here bishop f3, but you can take the bishop, and when they take like this, you can, for example, deliver queen g1 check. So the thing is, so many things they have you have in this situation, and what I'm actually trying to tell you, not all the time you can calculate everything, but for example, in a game like this, I'm sure that Bondarevsky didn't have and didn't calculate everything till the end. Of course he didn't, but he actually had a great feeling that the king on f2 was kind of unsafe, and he just wanted to carry on with the attack this way. So after rook h6, Kotov went for h4. Okay, a logical thing. He just avoids queen h2. He just wants to take advantage and to pin this rook on h6 and the bishop on g5. Looks a little bit problematic for us. But now Bondarevsky captured on g3. Probably this was the last moment where Kotov could have played a little bit better and took by bishop on g5, in which case after knight f1, rook f1, knight e5, d takes, bishop f8, If he captures here, you may just capture on h6 by bishop. And in a game like this with a bishop pair, with a weak h4, with a possibility to come up with this check, I definitely think that the king on g1 is unsafe and black has a great attacking chances. In the game was h takes g5, and just because of this move, he allowed one of the most beautiful combinations and something where in like a couple of minutes, I'm going to show you a position that I give to my students all the time when we work on visualization and calculation, especially in visualization, because there is one special position where you can, I'm gonna say, and that's gonna be a critical thing at some point, and I'm gonna tell you this is a puzzle. Take like 5 to 10 minutes, try to visualize, don't move your pieces, and see how good at visualizing you are. So after queen h2, king f2, played rook h4. He threatens the pawn on d4. He's down a piece, but king on f2 looks weak. This is one of those human moments where if you play against the engine just plays the best move, and then you say, ha, you can't play like this. But if you go in a real game against a human being, again with something like this, he's going to have such a big difficulties to defend himself and to be on top of his defensive task all the time. So after rook h4, white played rook g1. Bondarevsky captured on d4, played bishop b2, and for example, once again, you can challenge yourself and say, what would I play if I was black in this position? You're down a piece, you have like 2 pawns, maybe even 1 pawn for a piece. Is it enough? Of course not. But that king on f2 all the time looks kind of weak, and we're just wondering what are we supposed to do to take advantage of it. So after queen h4, queen on h4 goes after the king on f2 and just defends this rook on d4. A very lovely move. And once again, it creates something. For example, after bishop d4, Bondarevsky continued the attack with the knight e4. It's very interesting that he played king e3 and once again proven the fact that not all the times humans can defend themselves in the best fashion. King f1 was the only move, in which case knight g3, king f2 may happen, and here if you don't see anything better, and for example you waste like 20, 30, 40 minutes and you just realize you've got nothing, then in the worst case scenario you can just go for a perpetual check. But if you see something and if you're brave enough or you actually assess that you have a pretty good attacking chances, you can just say, okay, I'm willing to go with this one and I'm going to go with queen d4, and if he takes on g3, I'm going to take on e5. This is going to be winning, and of course it is. But if he goes with a3, I'll bring my queen back on h4. King is kind of weak. I have some very nasty and annoying jumps. Also, this knight on e5 is hanging, and I'm ready to carry on with my attack like this. Of course, that Bondarevsky would continue and would have a great winning and attacking chances if this happened. But look what happened in the game. After knight e4, Bondarevsky played king e3. Sorry, Kotov played king e3, which was a crucial mistake in this game. I always stop here. I always give this diagram and position to my students and say, take like 5 to 10 minutes. Let's see how good at visualization you are. So challenge yourself. White moves and wins. I don't want to tell you if you win a pawn, if you win a piece, if you win a rook, if you win a queen, if you mate your opponent. You don't know that during the game. But it's enough to tell you, just try to visualize this position and try to find a winning continuation. It's a very nice task. Take your time, take like 10 minutes and see how good you are at this. For all of you who found f4, congratulations, guys. Yes, that's the pawn sack. They gotta take by knight. And this is one of the most beautiful ending combinations that I've seen, especially in the Dutch defense. So after queen f2, white has to go with the king on d3. It's still difficult to visualize even from this point, not to mention from position where you gave check on e4 and the king is on e3. Imagine, when you played f4, pawn is not anymore on f5. When you played f4, knight has to take. So knight is not anymore on d3. d3 square is open for the king. Knight is on f4, queen is on f2, and everything changed. And now, queen takes d4, king takes d4. What a nice, attractive queen sack. Bishop c5, you don't even take the knight. And after king d3, Bondarevsky captured on e5 and made it his opponent. I very much enjoyed this game. What I like about this game was especially that plan with, so typical Stonewall, bishop goes on d6, c6, which creates a typical Stonewall pawn structure, queen e8, where the queen goes on h5, knight bd7, in order to fully take like flexible control of the e5, knight on e4, a very important Dutch idea that happens almost always, opening a file, opening rook f6 and rook h6 possibilities later. Queen h5, very important idea in terms of pressuring the king's side and supporting the g5 afterwards. g5, one of the most important moves for every Dutch player. And queen h5, bringing the queen here with the idea of rook lifting. I once again insist, don't rush with f4, don't rush with g4. Actually, I'm just going to use a famous expression of Morphy who says, help your pieces so they can help you. Which means if you play g4, bishop on c1 becomes dangerous. They can block the h file. You cannot play rook f6, rook h6. There is a bishop on c1. H file is going to be blocked. Nothing's going to have work. They will also have a great outpost f4. If you play f4, it's okay, but you are now attacking without one piece that actually happened in the game, and that was rook on f6. And finally, when you play rook f6, it's very important to do it with a pawn on g5, so they can never have any kind of pressure on the h6 square. After he did rook h6, I would just insist on one Mihail Stahl favorite element in his chess, intuitive chess. So intuition in chess is very important because here you sack a piece, you can't certainly calculate all the consequences, but this is like one of those calculated type of risks that may happen in the game and where you say, let it be. I'm gonna sack a piece. King is weak. I'm gonna crush his pawns around the king. I have a great attacking chances. Hopefully you enjoyed this Dutch game, Dutch miniature, Dutch opening, Stonewall attack, and I really hope you're gonna have lots of success with this similar setups. Thanks for watching and see you next time. Bye bye.